right, thank you all for coming. Welcome once again to a meeting at True Explorations. Last week we talked about attachments in our two-part series, Attachments and Addictions. And addictions, I see them as basically like an attachment on steroids. They're a form of attachment, but they kind of take the whole game to another level, because it's a repeated behavior that you find that you just can't stop doing despite the negative consequences of the addiction, of the behavior. That's really, in essence, the definition of an addiction. You know, we all have things that we like to do. We have habits, we have routines and rituals and things like that. And none of that is necessarily an addiction, because if it becomes a problem, you can stop doing it. It's only an addiction when, even despite the negative consequences of the action, and it doesn't matter how bad they get, or maybe, it's that whole bottoming out thing, but the consequences can get increasingly negative and destructive to your health, your life, your relationships. And for some reason, it proves to be very difficult, if not impossible, at least, in the short term, to relinquish the addiction. But, the two are related in the sense that an attachment is something that you have a relationship to, that is there because it helps you, it helps sort of the story of your ego to have something that it can, sort of grab onto and make part of its story, to help alleviate the suffering that is intrinsic to the existence of the ego. The ego can't let go of itself. It doesn't want to die. It just wants to be able to exist and to not suffer, which is a contradiction. And so it reaches out and grabs things in order to avoid the pain of separation, which is what makes the ego exist. So an addiction is very similar. We get addicted to things because they help alleviate pain. They help us to not feel as bad. It numbs the pain in some way. And this can be something that is just purely a numbing, some sort of anesthesia, or it can be something that sort of overpowers the senses, so that whatever the pain is, the emotional pain, the existential pain, that gets overridden by the loudness of the sensations created by the addiction. So, that's why something as simple as gambling can become an addiction. It's not like a drug, not physiologically, you're not ingesting something, but the experience of being in a casino or being on the computer and getting into the drama of whether you're going to win or lose, and the excitement of winning, all of that is just kind of flooding your system with neurotransmitters and dopamine and all these things. And so that overrides the pain, the existential angst that's there and that you're trying to get away from. And so that's, addiction in a nutshell. It's something that helps you to avoid pain, either by numbing you out or overpowering your senses, or sort of artificially creating a high that masks the negative feelings that's coming from whatever your wound is, whatever is going on with the ego that is in a state of pain. But then the question is, well, why can't people get out of it? Like if you are using, let's say, something like gambling, that's not a chemical dependency. You can sort of understand how people get stuck in something like a heroin addiction, because heroin physiologically changes you so that you can't function without it. You get sick, you get physically ill, and the agony of withdrawal is by itself enough to keep people addicted to it. Never mind all the psychological stuff that's going on. So, we can kind of understand why chemical dependencies become long-term and difficult to get out of. But even something that, isn't directly a chemical dependency, but it's just an activity like gambling or, even sex addiction, although that's kind of a controversial term. But we know that, gambling can be an addiction, and people, lose fortunes, go severely into debt over this thing. And so why is that? Why, can something that is so kind of innocuous sort of pull you in and make it so hard to let go? Well, the first answer is that, whatever works, whatever is sort of comes along and happens to show you a way to not feel the pain that you're in, when you engage in it, it becomes like this groove in consciousness. And every time you do it, that groove gets deeper and deeper, and it just becomes easier to follow that groove than anything else. And so it's just, sort of the force of habit that becomes deeper because of all the sort of psychological, emotional things that are going on with it. But there's a trick to addictions that one of my teachers keyed me into some number of years ago, which is that the way that addictions keep us so incredibly stuck is that they pull this little magic trick on the brain and on your consciousness, in that they promise you something. Every addiction, there's some promise within it that it will make you feel better, that it will take your problems away, it'll take your bad feelings away. There's something that it's going to give you. And the trick of it is that what ultimately happens is that it takes away the very thing that it promises to give you. It, in the short term, might seem like it's giving you what it promised, but as time goes on, as the minutes, hours, days go by that you don't engage in the addiction, it sort of set up a dynamic within your body and your consciousness that winds up taking away more than anything that it gave you. And so then you get into this downward spiral where whatever sort of level that you were at, and let's say it's very painful, let's say this is normal and you're feeling a lot of pain down here, it takes you up a little bit, but then the withdrawal takes you even lower than where you were to begin with. And so, like, for one example would be smoking cigarettes. People tend to smoke because it alleviates tension. It just sort of helps you to relax. And, sometimes, you just want to relax, and it's a quick way to get your nervous system to kind of relax a little bit. But then what winds up happening is that it starts creating more tension in your nervous system as you go into withdrawal from the substance. And so then you have to smoke another cigarette in order to alleviate the tension that the first cigarette created. And so it goes. You smoke another cigarette to, take care of the tension from the cigarette before that, and the 10 cigarettes before that, and the 1,000 cigarettes before that. And so you get caught in this loop where you can't get enough of the drug or the addictive behavior to get out of the trap that it's set, because every time you engage in it again, it takes a little bit more away from you. And you can see this, really clearly with like heroin addiction. People do heroin because it helps them to feel better. They can escape their problems, and they can just kind of float, in a sort of this numb, blissy kind of place. But then they come back. It's not a permanent solution, and they come back from that escape from their problems. And maybe the first time that's not that big a deal, but then they get into that addictive loop. And every time they do heroin, it takes them into that sort of numbed out place, and they start losing functionality. You can't really function in life when you're doped up like that. And you can't function in life when your entire motivation gets hijacked by the heroin, so that the only thing you care about is getting your next high. And so then you start stealing, you start lying, you start hurting people, you start doing all these things that you never thought you would do, just so that you can keep getting that heroin into your bloodstream. And that creates more problems. And so then the thing that was supposed to help you escape from your problems has created even more problems for you to have to escape from. And so then you need more heroin. And so it goes. Similar dynamic with the gambling addiction. Gambling promises to give you this huge payoff. If you just invest a little bit of money, you can get this big payoff, and then all of your money problems go away. Well, mathematically, you are far more likely to lose the money that you do have than to get that big payoff. And then even if you do get that big payoff, because you've been getting this emotional release, this emotional numbing from the problems that are in your life, because you're so focused on what you're doing with the gambling, it becomes a thing where you start creating more problems for yourself, and you're caught in that loop, and you can't get out of it because you're just doing that thing. And so then you lose everything, but you got caught up in it. And so then what do? Well, you can either deal with your problems, including the new problems that you created for yourself, or you can just take out a credit card and then you can gamble with that. And so then you went from not being in debt to getting little payoffs here and there that kind of pull you into the addiction, and then eventually everything that you gained is gone, and then you have to go into debt to keep the addiction going. And so then you go further and further into debt, and so this payoff that the addiction had promised you becomes the opposite. And we get so caught up in it because if we're in a place where the pain is so much that we are looking for something that powerful, whether it's an opioid or gambling or whatever it is, we were already in a place where we're having trouble regulating our emotions. And so then you introduce something like a substance or gambling or something like that, and over time your problems get bigger, and your ability to cope with them emotionally becomes less and less. And so it's this vicious cycle. That's why it's so hard. You're already starting out a little bit deficient in your ability to regulate your emotions, and by the time you have really bottomed out, your capacity for processing emotions, especially with heavy drugs, has gotten severely diminished. And so that's why you need to go away. You need rehab. You need a nice, beautiful, relaxing kind of environment where there's no stress on you. Nobody asks anything of you except for you to focus on your addiction. And you got to take out every other stressor so you can just focus on that, because the addiction has taken away from you the ability to cope with all the things that it had promised to help you to cope with. So that's the conundrum of addiction, and it's this extension of our attachment to feeling good. And remember, avoidance is a form of attachment. And so our avoiding our pain and avoiding our problems is a way of, you have to engage it enough to struggle with it and push it away. And so it actually becomes its own kind of attachment. And so, even though your drug use or whatever your addiction is, it's pushing away your problems and your pain, it's also holding on to them. You're in struggle with them rather than being present with them and processing them and healing them. And you're just trying to keep them at bay. And while they're at bay, they don't get any better. It still needs to move through you in order to let go. So all that emotional energy that you are not able to feel, you're not able to regulate or process, all of that's there, But then the addictive behavior that's numbing you out and keeping you from processing, well, there's all this emotional energy that's still building up every day behind that wall of addiction. And so then you not only have to process what you failed to process on day one, but then everything that was hidden from you on day 2, day 7, day 90, day 700, every day that you're not processing your emotions, they're building up behind this wall that your addiction is trying desperately to keep up. And it's just this thing that keeps building and building and building until something breaks. Something finally shifts because it's unsustainable. Like nobody can sustain that level of avoidance forever. And so you either have, a bottoming out experience and you recognize that, you're caught in a trap, you're addicted and you need help, or you die. Like those are really the only two options. It builds up until you can't take it anymore and you start facing your problems and you start digging yourself out of the ditch. But not everybody does that. Not everybody gets to that point before they OD, or they've created so many problems in their life through their addictions that they they take their own life. Now, I should clarify that by saying that this isn't the case with every single addiction that you could possibly have. I'm talking more about, when you get caught in that cycle. Everybody has addictions. Everybody has a vice that they sort of engage in that helps them to manage their emotions and their feelings and their problems and so forth. They're all maladaptive ultimately, but some are more manageable than others. Some you can engage in, on a sort of as needed basis without getting so pulled into it that it just snowballs and becomes, this thing where you either go to rehab or you die. We all have addictions and we don't all have to go to rehab, and we're not all going to die from our addictions. And in fact, I would say that to some extent, these numbing mechanisms, they're kind of the best that we have at times. Like if everybody was to just stop engaging in their vices, I think that the whole world would blow up. Because if all of a sudden, all this time you've been managing your emotions with some sort of addictive substance or behavior, and you just stopped cold turkey, then that buildup would hit you all at once. And I don't think that that's necessary. I think that we can have certain things that help us regulate our emotions that are ultimately addictive, but as long as you're still processing your emotions anyway, then it doesn't have to become a problem. It's when we are using drugs or whatever to just full stop, not feel anything. Just, I don't want to feel any of it. And you push it away. And then that's when it starts building up.